Now, the process of elimination, as it relates to figuring out which portfolio is going to be suitable for our client, it not only does it work for individual investors, but it also works for every single institutional investor as well. So this is the process that we have, and when it was last tested on the exam, it was worth about 10 points. I recall, and it was also applied to an institutional investor. So make sure that you're aware that it applies to both investor types. Now, when we think about the process of elimination, we're going to eliminate portfolios in 4 steps. The first step is that we're going to eliminate portfolios, or at least consider portfolios that meet our return requirements. So that is the most important objective that we have in terms of the investment policy statement. And of course, the second one is that we're going to then eliminate portfolios that fail to meet our risk objective. The key word in here that I did not say, but I'm going to highlight, is quantitative. So there's going to be some sort of number that's going to be calculated in here. Notice that this is going to be different from earlier on, where we looked at a qualitative aspect associated with risk. When we said a client was above average or below average, here we can't do that. We need some sort of number. And I'll show you a couple of different ways in which that can be done. So if you think about the risk characteristics for a moment of a particular portfolio, there are 2 different ways. There could be one called the shortfall, and they'll tell you on the exam which one they're looking for. So the shortfall risk is the average, the mean, minus 2 standard deviations away from the mean. So let's say that the average return of a portfolio is expected to be 8%, minus 2 times, let's say the standard deviation was 12% associated with the portfolio. So that means that there is 2 standard deviations in terms of the downside. That would represent a return that is going to be lower than minus 16%. That is how we go about calculating that particular number. So if somebody said, look, my shortfall, I never want to have a portfolio that will fall below, let's say, minus 20 with 2 standard deviations. So this portfolio that I've just calculated the shortfall risk for would be appropriate. If the client says 2 standard deviations at a time, or I don't want to lose more than 10% of the portfolio, then this portfolio would be inappropriate because it's too much. Has too much shortfall risk. Another thing that we should be looking for would be Roy's safety first criteria. That is another potential measure. So if we take the same number for this particular investor, maybe they say, look, the portfolio has an expected return of 8%. I'm going to be very unhappy with a return below 5%. Remember, in Roy's safety first criteria, the investor specifies what their minimum return objective is going to be. And then what we could say is obviously this portfolio has a standard deviation of 12%. So the safety first criteria ratio that we come up with is equal to 0.25. So what you'd have to do for all the portfolios that would be appropriate, you'd have to calculate Roy's safety first numbers for all the various different portfolio choices to make sure that they meet the criteria that would end up being specified. Now, one thing before we proceed, when it relates to return, this 8% return that we have, let's say that is a pre-tax return, and let's say it's equal to 8%. And not only that, it's pre-tax and nominal. Now, in some years on the exam, you actually have to go from a pre-tax nominal to an after-tax real. So the way in which you do that in terms of that number from after-tax to after-tax real is that you would end up taking your 8% times 1 minus the tax rate, which would be, let's say, 20% in this particular case, minus the rate of inflation. And let's say that the inflation rate is equal to 3%. So the after-tax real rate of return that the client is hoping to achieve now is 3.4%. So just be clear on the exam. They will tell you exactly what they're looking for, what the client's objective is going to be. It's not always going to be this nominal rate of return that I've just discussed. The third way that we eliminate portfolios is we eliminate portfolios that fail to meet constraints. And in this case, the most quantifiable constraint would be the constraint in cash. And we think of cash is equal to liquidity. And let's say that a client has ongoing needs. They need to withdraw, let's say, $50,000 from their portfolio every year. And let's say their portfolio value was worth, let's say, $1 million. If that were the case, the need for cash in the portfolio is 5%. So you'd eliminate portfolios that would not have enough cash. But be concerned here. I'm going to put a little red flag here. Just because we calculate the amount of cash to have is 5%. Watch for portfolio choices that would have too much cash. Let's say, for example, a 10 or 15% allocation in this case. Notice I'm putting a little red flag here to indicate to you that that's a possibility, because clearly we don't want to keep our clients too much into cash. And the final step, if we still have to make it, and again, we don't have to do these in order, we want to take a look at the expected risk-adjusted performance. So in the event of a tie, for example, what we could do is take a look at we could choose the portfolio with the highest Sharpe ratio, for example, if we're unable to come up with, if we're not able to eliminate everything. That is a possibility here as well. We could also take a look at some diversification attributes like industry concentrations that the investor hopes to avoid. So there are many different ways that we can eliminate on number 4. But chances are that we should be able to eliminate portfolios by exhausting steps number 1, 2, and 3. This one here, number 4, in my recollection, hasn't come up that often. Okay, so why don't we take a look at an actual example and put our knowledge to work. Here we go. I've come up with 5 different proposed allocations. I got portfolio A, B, C, D, and E. All of the returns are calculated for us. So these are nominal returns here. So we've got our output there. We've got our expected standard deviation. So from there, we're able to calculate our shortfall risk, if indeed that is necessary. And I've also calculated, I've got the Sharpe ratios in here as well. All the calculations are done. You don't have to come through and figure out what these are going to be. Assume that these are going to be given and assume that they're going to be correct. Don't put any more thought into these proposed allocations at all. So they are written in order here from portfolio A all the way to portfolio E, from the smallest standard deviation and return all the way up to the largest. So that would possibly be the way in which it's done on the exam, simply just to ease the presentation. So let's go over and take a look at some of our client circumstances here, and these would be the bullet points that would be provided to you on the exam as well. So we know that the client has an investable asset base of $100,000 and has ongoing expenses during the year of $8,000. That should indicate to us in terms of what the cash balance is going to be for this portfolio. So it looks like the investor is going to need $8,000 divided by 100,000. The liquidity need for this portfolio is approximately 8% a year. So for portfolios that do not meet that requirement, we can get rid of that particular portfolio. So this is the cash balance. Now, coincidental to that, the client also has a minimum return objective of 8% a year. So we're going to eliminate portfolios that are less than 8% in terms of return. So if we go back quickly and take a look at the portfolios already, can't we eliminate portfolio A? Because if you take a look at portfolio A's rate of return is 7.37. Our minimum return was 8%. We can get rid of that one almost immediately. And if we take a look at another portfolio choice, can't we get rid of portfolio E? Portfolio E does not have enough cash, only has 5%. We clearly need an 8% return an 8% exposure to cash. Remember, when we think about cash, cash is equal to the liquidity requirement. So let me just put that here to remind us that we're dealing with liquidity here for the cash component. Now let's go back and take a look at some of the other data that our client has. So the client has a minimum return threshold of minus 13% expressed as 2 standard deviations below the expected return. So clearly we're going to have to do a calculation for that. Let's see, before I have to do any calculations, whether or not there's something else that I could say about this particular client. So due to past performance, the client wishes to establish a maximum exposure to alternative investments of 10%. Let's go back and see if there's any exposure to alternative investments that's greater than 10%. And you can see right away, if we take a look at hedge funds here, hedge funds would be our only exposure to alternative investments. So clearly they're testing your knowledge about other parts of the CFA program at level 3 when they write something like that. And notice this portfolio over here has a 15% exposure, portfolio D. So we would eliminate that portfolio already. So notice what I've done. You don't have to do the process of elimination in order. If there are obvious eliminations that you can do, then go ahead and do them. So that only leaves now 2 portfolio choices for us, and that's either portfolio B or portfolio C. So let's take a look to see what we have done so far, the process of elimination in action, and this would be to get the points on the exam. So we've eliminated portfolio A. And why do we eliminate portfolio A? The return is too low. If they ask you to justify this, then that would be the reason why. We've also eliminated portfolio D, and there is too much exposure to alternative investments, or too much weight in the strategic portfolio to alternatives. And you can write alts like that. I'm sure the grader would understand what you mean. You can also put in brackets here if you want HF. I think that in the context of the question, they would know that that would mean a hedge fund. Remember, I'm a very busy guy. I'm a guy in a hurry. I want to finish the exam. So I'm using all the abbreviations that I can that make sense. E, obviously I'm eliminating that because there's not enough cash. So far I've made 3 easy eliminations. So what we're going to have to do now is calculate the shortfall risks for 2 different portfolios, which is why I'm saying make the easy eliminations first. Because if you make if you decide you're going to calculate the shortfall risk for all the portfolios, you may not have to, because I've already eliminated 3 of them. So what I want to be able to do is, let's say, for example, let's calculate the shortfall risk for portfolio C. So if I go back and take a look at portfolio C, what I need to do is to take a look at the expected return minus 2 standard deviations with that expected standard deviation that is given. So if I take a look at what that return is going to be, so that's the shortfall risk is 8.25%. That's the expected return on the portfolio, minus 2 times the standard deviation. So that is 10.91%. And this is equal to minus 13.51%. And if you remember, if we go back to the client said they're not going to be happy with any return below 13% with a 2 standard deviation threshold. So we eliminate portfolio C as well, because this portfolio fails the shortfall criteria. And just to confirm that the portfolio that we want to choose portfolio, the one that is left. The only one that is left now is B, that satisfies everything. So portfolio B, if I go and take a look, what I'm hoping for portfolio B is that it satisfies this here. That's the only thing that's left, that it satisfies the shortfall criteria. So if I go to calculate it in terms of 2 standard deviations away from the mean, I've got 8.36 minus 2 times 10.54. It looks like it's going to be close. And this ends up being minus 12.54. So this portfolio here passes all of the process of elimination. So I'm going to choose portfolio B. If they ask you on the exam, select a portfolio, make sure that you say that you choose B, circle it. You're not allowed to take a highlighter on the exam, but I'm going to highlight it for you anyhow here, just to show the examiners that that is what you are in fact actually doing. So always make sure that you that you do that for your choices. So when this was last asked on the exam, something as straightforward as this page here was worth about 10 points on the exam. It ought to have been a fairly easy thing to be able to achieve. And remember how I told you before that this does not just apply to an individual investor. This also would apply to an institutional investor too. So you've got obviously the process of elimination, how we actually come about with the strategic asset allocation for a client. You know as well that you can make adjustments to the nominal pre-tax return and how you can convert those very quickly to real after-tax rates of return. So that wraps up this lesson. Thank you very much. And when you get an opportunity to read up about Monte Carlo simulation in an investment policy statement context, I'll meet you over there for that lesson. In the meantime, thanks a lot for tuning in, and I'll see you very soon.